This is a quick start guide to shooting video on the Canon R6V. This isn't a full menu guide, but it will cover the majority of the settings you need to know in video. So grab your Canon R6V and let's get started. First, we'll make sure we're in video by setting the video dial to video, the mode dial to M for manual, and then we'll turn on the camera. Let's go into the menu and let's start with the wrench menu, because here we can control what the rest of the menu is going to look like based on what we choose. And it all starts with the record function card folder selection option. And here we'll see we have options for photo and video, but for video, it's important to know that if you shoot in standard, your menu is going to look different than if you shoot in any of the other modes like relay recording, proxy, sub-recording, and redundant recording, which is record to multiple. Just so we're all on the same page, record to multiple means that the video file will be recorded to the CF card and SD card simultaneously. The main and sub recording allows you to record a raw video file to the CF card and a compressed format to the SD card. Then we have main and proxy, which is my personal favorite. It allows you to record a full resolution video file to the CF card and then a smaller low resolution proxy file to the SD card. This is especially great if you're recording raw videos and you want to have a proxy that you can immediately edit off of without putting all that extra strain on your computer. And relay recording just allows you to keep a recording going even if the first card gets full. So let's say your first card fills up during a recording. The recording doesn't just stop, it actually just switches over to the SD card and continues recording. And finally, standard just means that you record everything to your primary card first, and then once that gets full, it'll switch over and record onto the second card. Personally, I will set mine to main and proxy, but for the purposes of this video, I'll show you what the menu looks like in standard. Next, let's go to page 5 of the wrench menu here, and we're going to set the cooling fan settings. Here you can choose to have the fan on, off, or set to auto, which means that it only will enable when it's recording a video file. And then you have the speed that the fan is going to be at. You can have it stop and then low, medium, and high. The rule of thumb here is if you're in a hot environment or you're recording like 4K 60 and above, then you'll want to have the fan on and you'll want to set the fan rotation speed to medium or high. Otherwise, if you're in a controlled environment like a room, or if it's just cold out, you can turn the fan off or leave it on auto and simply put the rotation speed to low or medium. I must keep mine at auto and medium because that works for most scenarios. Finally, let's go to power saving here. And I like to disable the screen dimmer, the screen off, and the auto power off. I don't really forget to turn my camera off, and I don't want the screen randomly dimming or turning off on me if I'm not actively looking at the screen. And so this is personal preference, but yes, I disabled them all. All right, now let's move over to the red camera menu, which is the first option here, and we'll start on page 1. The first thing you're gonna wanna set here is actually your movie record format. And here you can see we have options for RAW, HEVCS, 422, 420, and then XF AVCS 422 and 420. For most users, if you're editing on a Mac where you have dedicated chips or a higher end computer, you can get away with recording in the HEVCS option and you'll still get pretty much the exact same quality as you would on the AVCS option, but with significantly smaller file sizes. And of course, if you really want the best performance out of this camera in terms of image quality, you can shoot RAW. Just know those files are going to be huge and they take a lot more on your computer to edit them properly. But in any case, you'll be in HEVCS 422 10-bit or AVCS 422 10-bit for the best compressed video format quality. Let's stick with HEVCS. Now we can move on to movie record size. And here you can see you have one menu that allows you to select the resolution you want to shoot in, another menu that shows you the frame rate you're going to capture, and then this last one will allow you to change the codec, if you will, or the format that it's recording in. But in HEVCS mode, you only have LGOP. So we can ignore that and we'll start with the resolution. You have 4K fine, which means it's oversampled from the 7K sensor. And then anything without the word fine just means it's not oversampled. It's probably line skipped or something like that. And then the D here denotes the aspect ratio. This is 17:9, so it's slightly wider than normal. And that goes for 2K as well and 4K. Most of the time, you'll just be living in the 4K fine U mode because that's 16:9 and you're getting the highest resolution because it's oversampling from 7K. In this mode though, you can see that you only have 24, 30, and 60 frames per second. So if you want to shoot 4K 120, you'll actually have to go over and change the resolution from fine to regular, and then you will get access to 4K 120. And finally, if you want to record 180 frames per second, once again, change the resolution. That is only available in the 2KD or Full HD options here. You'll see it becomes available. For now, I'm going to set this to 4K fine at 24 since that is pretty much what I'm shooting in 99% of the time. Now, if you're someone who wants to shoot OpenGate, you can enable that in this page. So if you hit enable, you can see the formats become more limited. You only have HEVCS and RAW. And then the movie record size also is limited. You have only one resolution because it's the full frame. And then you can go up from 24 to 30 frames per second. But you can actually change the compression of the file. So you can go LGOP, intraframe light, intraframe standard, and high intraframe, depending on the bitrate you want. For now, I'll disable OpenGate since you'll likely not be using it that often. Let's move on to page 2 here, and we'll want to make sure we have sound recording enabled to record sound. We'll change the audio format to LPCM 24-bit 4-channel for the best quality possible. In the settings, I personally turn off the built-in microphone. So to do that, I go to recording mode here. I set it to manual. And then for the recording level, I set it to 0. But if you do want to have a scratch audio recording the built-in microphone on at all times, you can change this to auto and just let it do its thing. Next, let's head over to page 3. And here we have ISO speed settings. For this, I just want to expand the range available to me so I have the greatest control over this camera. So here you'll see an L next to 100, and that's just because I'm shooting in a log profile, so it's letting me know this is below the base ISO. But you'll want to make sure you set this to the lowest option possible, which for me is 100. And for the maximum, you'll see I already set it to the max, which is high H at 102/400 ISO. Am I ever really going to be shooting in that? Most likely no, but I like just having full control just in the case or in the scenario that I need it. I'm not limited by the camera. Back in this menu, we'll go to AV 1/8 stop increment and we enable this. This just allows you to have finer aperture control when using an RF lens. So if we go here out of the menu, you can see as I move this dial, it's going in 8 stops versus your traditional 3rd stops. And so this is just really nice fine control you have in video mode. On to the next page, we have color mode, and this is where we'll enable C-Log2 to get the most dynamic range out of this camera. So we'll select this. We'll make sure we're on custom picture, which is this CP icon here. And then we'll hit info so we can customize it. And then we go into select CP file and we select Canon Log 2. Now, if you want to learn how to fully take advantage of C-Log2, the customizable settings I use, and how to expose and grade it, you can check out my C-Log2 guide for the R6V here. But for now, we'll leave everything at the default settings because none of that is necessary for the purposes of this video. Next, we'll go to page 5. And the only thing I want to bring your attention to here is white balance and lens aberration correction. For white balance, I just want to show you all the options you have, which you have auto, which you don't want to shoot in when you're shooting in video because it can shift on you randomly and that is very hard to fix in post. So you'll either use one of the presets or if you'd like, you can create your own. That's what the K1 through K4 options are for. And so you just hover over it and then using the top wheel, you can adjust the values of it. I've set mine to 5200 for daylight, 4400 for mixed lighting, 3200 for tungsten, and 7000 for shade/sunsets. But feel free to customize these to your liking. For now, I'll select K1. And then the next thing I want to change in this menu is shockless white balance, and I want to set that to on. This will just prevent the camera, if you do change presets mid-recording, it's not going to suddenly jump to that new preset. It's going to do a gradual shift over to it, which can look a lot more natural than just a sudden transition like that. Next, for lens aberration correction, here, I personally like to turn off the peripheral illumination correction. This just removes the vignette by brightening the corners of the image. But I like vignettes, number one. And two, when you do that, you introduce a little more noise in the corners. It's not like that much noticeable, but I just prefer it not to do that at all. But I do like the other corrections. So distortion correction, I appreciate a lot. Focus breathing, I don't like just because it crops in a lot, especially, or it depends on the lens, but it can crop in a lot, which I don't like. So I leave that off. And I like chromatic aberration correction and diffraction correction. Next, we have the pre-recording setting on page 5. This just allows you to set a time that the camera will record before you've pressed the shutter button. So if I press the shutter button, and I have it set to 5 seconds, it'll actually have 5 seconds before the button is pressed already recorded. This is great for event videos, weddings, wildlife, where you may not capture the action you want at the moment you press the shutter. And so this is just a little bit of assurance against that. The only thing to be aware of with this setting is that it will drain your battery more now that your camera is constantly recording a cache buffer of 3 or 5 seconds. So in this case, I'm gonna leave this to off, but if you want that enabled, you would actually turn that on. On the next page, we have your tally lamp. This is the lamp in the front of the camera that blinks red when it's recording and is otherwise off if it's not recording. Personally, I don't really care to know this, and I also prefer if people, like the person I'm interviewing, doesn't know when the camera is rolling and has that red eye like glaring at them. And so personally, I turn this off, but if you like it, turn it on. Next, we have image stabilizer mode, and you can see that the first option here is grayed out, and that's because the lens I have, it actually has the IS dial on the lens body itself. And so to enable and disable this, I would just use that switch instead. Here you can enable digital IS though, and this just allows the camera to do image stabilization inside the camera by cropping into your image and then making those adjustments as you're recording. With this on, the crop is fairly minimal, but if you put this on enhanced, the crop becomes pretty intense. And so this is purely preference, but I really don't like digital IS, so I always leave this off. Next, we have subject tracking image stabilization. The difference between this and digital IS is only that the subject tracking IS will try to keep the subject it detects in the same location on the frame that it was recorded in. So this can be useful for vloggers, but the crop can get pretty intense depending on the movement you introduce. Once again, I don't like doing image stabilization inside the camera, and so I just leave this off, but if that's something you want to experiment with, feel free. Next, we have video auto level, and this does something very similar with the IBIS, just that when the camera detects that it's on unlevel surface, it will automatically sort of rotate the sensor to be level. If it's not within that range of the IBIS being able to correct it properly, it will do a digital crop instead. And so once again, I leave this off for that reason. And finally, something they've added to the R6V here is magnification record display. In prior cameras like the R5 Mark II, if you hit record and then you want to magnify the image just to check, whatever focus or something like that, you wouldn't be able to do so. But you now can on the R6V. You just have to make sure this is enabled. So even if you're recording, you can hit the magnifying glass and it will crop in or zoom in without disrupting the recording. Next, let's go to page 8. And here we're going to go to HDR C-Log View Assist, and we're going to turn that on to BT709. So instead of looking at a log image on your back LCD, this will allow you to see a BT709 conversion LUT on it. and it doesn't bake it in. So when you bring this into your editing software, it's still gonna have the log footage that you can color grade, adjust, and things like that. This is just a way to preview what the final image would look like on your camera. And if you're using an external monitor, you can set the HDMI to on to send that signal to it as well. The next two options here are just different ways of judging exposure. False color changes your image into discrete colors that show specific brightness values, and that is my preferred way to expose. And then you have zebras, which allow zebra stripes patterns to appear on parts of your image that you've assigned at a certain brightness level. If you want a better breakdown of these settings, you can check out my C-Log2 guide where I break them down here. Next, on page 9, we'll go to shooting info display. And here's where we can set our grid. So we have 3x3, 6x4, and diagonal. We can change our brightness info from wave monitor or histogram, which is more of the photo option. So I set this to wave monitor. And then to customize it, I go to waveform setting here and change it from RGB to line. And if we quickly go out of the menu here and I hit info a few times, that is the waveform on the right showing up. I much prefer that to judge exposure than a histogram, and so that's the options I have on my camera. Going back to the menu, I changed the electronic level to be small. I find large to be a little bit overwhelming and takes up way too much screen space. Recording emphasis will put a red box around your LCD monitor when you are recording. I find that to be a little bit obnoxious, and so I turn it off, but if you like it, turn it on. You have the option to add aspect markers here, and so this is especially useful if you're shooting an open gate and you want to have guidelines for vertical, 9x16, and then 16x9 horizontal. And you can do that here, but you don't have just that. You have a ton of different options you can choose from. For now, I'm going to leave them off, but if you need that, you do have it there. And then finally, you can display different information from your lens. And so you can choose the distance displayed when you're shooting in manual focus or all the time. I don't like having it on all the time. I like it for manual focus only. And you can change the unit from feet to meters. I've set mine to feet. And then I like showing what focal length is on my camera. This is probably not that useful, especially if you're using primes, but for zooms, I kind of like having a second point of view of, oh, I'm shooting in the right focal length that I want. Finally, let's head to page 10 here. Now we're going to set auto power off temp to high, and you'll get a warning that the camera can get hot on the back and to be careful, but that hasn't really been an issue for me. And all this does, it allows you to use the camera for longer before it decides to shut off due to overheating. So this is just great to get the most out of the camera, especially if you're in hot environments, before it decides to actually turn off. Next, for standby low res, I turn that off. This just changes the resolution of your LCD screen to be of a lower quality when the camera is not recording. I find that to be a bit annoying, and so I turn that off. Technically, that will use more battery, but that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. And then finally, we have HDMI display, and we have three options here. Have everything only show up on the monitor, or you can set it to show up on the monitor and the LCD screen. And the menu, like the one you're seeing right now, will only show up on one of them, and you can select that, and that's with the check mark here. You'll see it says LCD plus HDMI, and then playback on LCD, and then this one does to playback on HDMI. For now, I'm gonna leave it where it's at. All right, let's move on to the autofocus menu, and there isn't too many things I'll go over here, but the first thing is you wanna make sure you have movie servo AF enabled. This is continuous autofocus. And then for subject detect AF, I set this to detect only, which simply means that once the camera detects a subject and that subject were to walk off screen, the camera is not going to hunt for focus and then eventually focus to the background. Instead, it's going to leave the focus at the last location it was at. I find this to be a lot more cinematic, and so I leave it at that setting. Next, we have AF area, which I just leave at whole area, but if you want to select a certain part of your frame, you have all these different options and flexible zones you can use, but for now, we'll leave it at whole area. On page 2, we have subject to detect. I usually like to select the type of subject. If I'm shooting people, I'll set this to people. If I'm shooting animals, I'll set this to animals. But honestly, auto works pretty much most of the time, so you can leave it at that and you probably won't experience any issues. I leave eye detection on auto as well, just so that the camera chooses which eye to focus on. But if you really care, you can choose the right or left eye. Just know that the right eye is referring to the subject's right eye. So this is my right eye, but it looks like your left from your point of view. And so just keep that in mind. So when you select the right eye, it's this eye it's going to choose. And if you select left eye, it's this eye it's going to choose. It's the left or right eye of the subject. And then here's where you can register people priority. So if you're at an event and you want the camera to prioritize focus on a specific subject, let's say it's a bride at a wedding, you can enable this and then take a photo of the bride, ideally front on with good lighting, and then the camera will now recognize that bride and prioritize her in the frame when it detects her. And so this is really useful for those scenarios, but for most of the time, I don't really use it. Next, we'll go to page 3, and here, AF for close-up demos is a new setting Canon has introduced that allows more of like that YouTuber review where they'll hold the product and they'll bring it up to the camera and the camera will then switch focus to the product and you can bring it back and it'll focus back on you. That's basically what this allows you to do. You can enable that if you're using it for that purpose. Otherwise, I leave it off. And then of course, you can customize the speed of your autofocus. 7 and 6 is where I'm usually at. But if I'm shooting slow motion, I'll go to 8, 9, or 10. Now we'll skip these few options here. And the thing I want to focus on page 6 is manual focus peaking. And I like to set this level to high. And personally, I find red to be most useful, but depending on your scenario, you may prefer one of the other colors like yellow or blue. And then simply when I do need manual focus peaking, I use the D-pad right on the back of the R6V, which is normally hotkeyed to peaking by default. And that's an easy way to enable and disable this feature without having to go into the menu. All right, we're almost done here. Let's head over to the customized control menus, which is the green menu. And here is where you can customize the buttons and dials. So here we have customized buttons for shooting, and you can change it for photo and video independently. The only thing I would recommend here is to create a hotkey for false color. I set mine to number 3 here. And the false color icon is this one that looks like 3 gradients with a sun icon on the corner. And that just allows me to very quickly enable and disable false color while I'm shooting. But of course, feel free to dive deeper and customize this camera to however works best for you. And if you want to adjust the dials, you can go to customize dials and control rings here, and you can change the top wheel, the back wheel, the other back wheel, and then of course your control ring on your RF lenses, and I set that to Kelvin so I can quickly adjust the white balance if I need to. Next, we're going to head to the orange camera menu here, and we'll go to page 3, and you'll want to change release shutter without lens to on. This allows you to use manual focus lenses or even like vintage lenses that don't have electronic parts to communicate with the camera. With this disabled, the camera prevents you from using those lenses because it thinks there is no lens on there. And so just enable this and you'll be able to use any lens you'd like. And finally on here, I like to set retract lens on power off and disable. This just makes sure that if you're using manual focus on your lens and you turn off the camera, that your last focus position won't be moved. Normally, with this enabled, you'll turn off the camera and your lens will actually readjust its focus to its default position. It is fairly niche, but for anyone who cares about that sort of thing, I find it very helpful. So those are all the main settings you'll need to shoot video in the standard mode, but I want to bring your attention to the S&F mode, which is something you don't see in most of Canon's mirrorless lineup. And to do that, we'll actually change the dial here on the top and go over to S&F. Now, when we go into the menu here, we'll start in the red menu, red camera menu on page 1. And the first thing you want to do here is change the shooting mode to S&F manual. This will give us the ability to control all the settings from this mode. Now, once again, you want to choose your recording format. Here, you don't have the option to shoot RAW in this mode, but you have HEVCS and AVCS, and so I'll keep it at XF-HEVCS. And then here in our movie record size is where it gets interesting. So in the movie record size menu, we have the exact same layout, but it looks a little bit different. You have your resolutions, the frame rate that you'll be capturing, and then the frame rate that you'll be playing back on. And then of course your format here, which doesn't change. So depending on the frame rate you play back on and the frame rate you capture, you'll get different effects in terms of slow motion or fast motion. Most of the time, I'm setting the playback frame rate to 24 because that's what I'm usually using. And then that just means now I can adjust the capture frame rate depending on the motion I want to have. And so if you want slow motion, you want anything above 24 frames per second. If you look on the top right of the screen here, the camera will tell you what speed you'll be playing back in. And so at 120 frames per second, played back at 24 frames per second, you have 5 times slow motion. If we go down one, we have 4 times slow motion if you do 96 frames, 3 times slow at 72 frames, and so on. And eventually, if you go to 24 and 24, you get actual speed. But if we go below that, we'll see that we get 1.10% fast, 1.2% fast, 1.3, 1.5, 2 times, 4 times, 8 times, 12 times, and 24 times fast. And so these are things for time lapses effectively. So anything below 24 and you go up to 24, you're getting fast motion, which is time lapses. And then anything above 24, like up to 120, is slow motion. Just know that depending on the resolution you choose in the first menu here, you'll have different frame rates you can capture in the second menu. So if we go to the full HD here, and then we go to S&F, you see we have 180 as your max and then 1 as your lowest. But if we go back and go to 4K Fine, you can see our max is at 60 and our lowest is at 3. I know this can get a little bit confusing, but I just really like how they lay out the menu and you get all the information on whether it's fast motion or slow motion on the top of the menu here. It even shows you your total record time, the frame rate you're playing back, capturing, and the data rate. And so you can really figure it out. It just takes a little bit of getting used to. But for me, I just look at the speed mentioned on the top right corner here, and that's how I'll decide, oh, do I want it to be a time lapse that goes really fast? Or do I want it to be something that gets slowed down 2.5 times? So there you have it. That is everything you need to know to shoot video on the Canon R6V. If I didn't explain anything very well, or if you still have some questions, leave them in the comment section below and I'll do my very best to help you out. Now, if you want to learn how to take full advantage of C-Log 2 and how to expose it, color grade it, etc., you can check out my full guide breaking that down here. Thank you so much for watching all the way until the end. I appreciate every single one of you who do, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.